Some very important things happened in Washington and are still happening. We haven't tied the bow on this package yet, but I want to begin by thanking Senator Collins, Senator King, Congresswoman Pingree, Congressman Golden for their tremendous work on this effort. This was an incredible piece of teamwork. I, along with Pat Kelleher, Commissioner of Marine Resources, and Meredith Mendelson, his Deputy Commissioner, worked closely with all 4 members of the delegation and their staffs to draft and secure this very important provision over the last several weeks. I am proud of our united bipartisan teamwork on behalf of the people of the state of Maine. As you've all heard before, Maine's lobster industry is a model of sustainable harvesting practices and management, with generations of Maine lobstermen working hard to protect the future of the fishery. Maine lobstermen are also committed to protecting the right whale. In fact, our lobstermen helped develop measures to protect right whales, and they've complied with difficult and onerous federal regulations over many years now, removing about 30,000 miles of line from the water and spending tens of thousands of dollars out of their own pockets at huge expense to modify or outright change up their gear to protect the right whale. They've done this even when there's never been a right whale sighting or death, never been a right whale death attributed to Maine lobster gear, ever. Let me repeat. There's never been a right whale death attributed to Maine lobster gear. Despite this fact, the federal government, which is being pushed by extremist organizations, has been moving ahead with new regulations that would put an end to Maine's lobster fisheries and ruin the lives and livelihoods of thousands and thousands of hardworking Maine people and their families. They're doing this based not on data, but on speculation and assumptions and estimates on the theoretical possibility that a right whale could be injured or killed. That's where this new provision comes in. This is a straightforward, common sense compromise that will allow our lobstermen to continue to operate while still complying with the most recent right whale rule. I'm also pleased that the new provision authorizes a grant program that may fund innovative gear technologies and the monitoring that can help the Maine Department of Marine Resources manage this fisheries. But this provision is also a lifeline for the industry. Without this provision, it is no exaggeration to say that Maine's lobster industry could be facing a complete shutdown. In effect, extinction of the industry, extinction of the fishing families and industry. And the effects of that across our state would be not only profound, it would be devastating. Look, our lobster fishermen who set out from our docks before dawn, as Curt did this morning, who haul traps in all kinds of weather, who feed their families and neighbors in our state's economy with their catch, they are at the heart of Maine. I say this as a woman who descends from fishermen in Stonington back many, many generations. And I am proud to stand united today and this week with our congressional delegation to fight for that industry, to fight for their families, to fight for the state of Maine. And we always have stood united on this issue and always will. I strongly, strongly urge Congress to pass the Omnibus Appropriations Bill with this provision in it. Thank you. Back to you, Curt. Okay, where'd you go?
That's all right. Senator Collins.
Thank you. Well, the governor said it very well. I would add that this is a victory for common sense. In the 25 years that I've been privileged to represent Maine in the United States Senate, I've never seen a worse case of regulatory overreach to address a problem and blame an industry that is not at all responsible for a problem. I've also never seen the Maine delegation, which is ideologically diverse, and the governor more united to protect an iconic way of life in the state of Maine. The governor said it well. The regulations the Biden administration has already proposed and the industry killing regulations that it was planning to propose this summer would have meant the death of the lobster industry in Maine. It would have led to the complete closure of the fishery. Now, think about that. Not only does that affect the hardworking lobster men and women like Curt, who are out there on their boats right now, it would affect everyone from trap makers to restaurant owners, bait dealers. It would have had an enormous impact on tens of thousands of Maine's families. Now, what we've worked so hard, and believe me, it was a hard-fought battle, and to get into this omnibus funding bill is essentially a reprieve of up to 6 years from the regulations that were coming at us like a freight train this summer. In addition, I was able to secure $10 million that was in the underlying bill for additional research and monitoring in the Gulf of Maine. We need better data so that we can show that the right whale is following its food, the plankton that it eats, into colder Canadian waters. That's one reason this has been so frustrating to deal with. There's another pot of money of $22 million that I worked to secure in the appropriations bill that also will help to pioneer innovative gear. And finally, as a result of the regulations, there's an additional $20 million that Angus and all of us were particularly involved in securing that will provide for, again, additional testing of gear and research. My hope is that we can show through this data collection and more research that dynamic management would be the way to go, where you don't close down any of Maine's waters unless there is an actual sighting of a right whale. That would be a common sense approach. Again, I want to thank the governor, the Department of Marine Resources, the lobster men and women, their associations, the MLA, the MLU, and the entire congressional delegation for working as a real team to protect this iconic industry in our great state. Thank you. I think it's over to you, Angus.
Okay. I was thinking you and the governor covered it so thoroughly. I just think it should be understood what an achievement this is to be able to work out a position of this complexity in a relatively short time. The court decision that really put us at jeopardy came down in November. So we had a matter of weeks to try to work this out. We had to work with committees in both the House and the Senate. We had to work with the Republican leader, the Democratic leader, the Speaker of the House. And to reiterate Susan's comment, I have never seen such close consultation, teamwork, not only among the members of the delegation, but with the governor and also with Marine Resources, with the Maine Lobstermen's Association, with the folks who really know the facts on the water, if you will. And it was one of the most difficult, to give you an idea, I called Susan about one of the unsettled matters at 3:30 in the morning on Sunday. So that was the nature of the work, and our staffs were amazing through this. The basic point is that what we've achieved, the word reprieve has been used. I would call it a pause for two things to happen. One, greater research on the whereabouts of the whales. The recent data tells us that the whales are moving offshore and into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. That's where most of the sightings are. And by the way, I would also mention that a great deal of the danger to the whales comes from ship strikes. And one of the things that occurred to me is, why are they picking on the lobster industry? Why not close Boston Harbor to all ships? I mean, that seems ridiculous, but so is the closure of the lobster industry. The second piece, which has been mentioned, is research on innovation in the technology of catching lobsters. And we don't know what direction that's going to go in. There are a number of suggestions that have been made, but there needs to be a lot of research to determine what will work if it's necessary to mitigate the risk, and also how much it will cost, what kind of burden it will put on our industry. The lobster industry has already made tremendous investments in mitigating whatever risk there is to the whales, weaker links, weaker rope, changing, as the governor mentioned, changing the way the traps and the ropes are configured to take over 30,000 miles of rope out of the Gulf of Maine. And so we'll continue with those. In the meantime, I'm most interested in the data. And one of the most frustrating things about this is that the lobster industry was in effect sentenced to economic death based upon no evidence, no proof. And I understand you want to be careful, particularly when you're dealing with an endangered species, but there should be some data to back up such a draconian result. So one of the major things for me is going to be to work with all the federal agencies to develop better data. I think it's going to show, as Susan suggested, that we may not need to do radical gear modification if indeed the whales aren't in the Gulf of Maine to any significant degree and aren't really at risk. So no entanglements since 2004, no deaths ever attributable to Maine lobster gear. This isn't the whole answer. It's a pause, as I mentioned. We're going to continue, the delegation and the governor and the lobster industry are going to continue to work together over the next 6 months into next year to see if this can be, how do we remove this cloud of uncertainty and get to the point where the people who work on the water can get up in the morning and know that they're going to have a livelihood at the end of the day or at the end of the month. So again, I want to thank everyone down here who worked on this, and also the people in Maine. It was an amazing cooperative effort. Senator Collins particularly was enormously helpful in obtaining the funding that was necessary to put the final deal together. So this was a Christmas miracle for the lobster industry, and Mary would say it was a Hanukkah miracle. But in any case, it was a significant step forward, and we look forward to building on this to work with our colleagues to be sure this threat is ultimately lifted.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Pingree, I understand that we're going to lose you momentarily, so please share your thoughts.
Sure. I'm a little logistically challenged this morning, as you can see, and I will share, and if I need to, I'll just jump on and off a couple of times. But I echo everything that's already been said. Of course, this was a huge effort. It's not over till it's over. I don't want to jinx anything, and I've got all my fingers and toes crossed, as I know we all do, because we've got 2 significant votes to get through. But having this language embedded in this extremely important bill that is full of an enormous amount of important things for the state of Maine was critical. And everything everyone said about the difficulty of doing this, the importance of having, the fishermen and the state and all of our delegation on board have been critically important. I want to emphasize just a couple of things. As people have already said, this is about language, and it's also about funding. And having that funding in this bill is what is going to help us be able to move forward, collecting the data, looking at gear modification, making sure if we're talking to fishermen about gear modification, that it's actually stuff that works, that can be produced, that doesn't endanger their lives, it's realistic. As you know, because of this court decision, and I don't think good policy should be made in court, we were required to have this all done within 2 years, and that's just impossible. We don't have the data, and we haven't had sufficient testing of any kind of gear changes. So we were asking something impossible of the fisheries. As people have said, it could result in a closure of a massive amount of this critically important fisheries, and that just can't happen. And one other thing, I see this as a compromise from those that are concerned about the right whale, as we all are, those who are there protecting them, and those who care about our fishing industry, those people who live in my community, who go out to work every day, who are out on their boats right now, anticipating a storm, but they are critically important to getting all this done. And I think the vitriol that we've heard out there, the language that isn't necessary, is not what helps us get forward. We are doing our best to be part of a cooperative effort to bring everybody together to try to make good policy and to make sure that the funding is there for what needs to be done. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. I'm crossing my fingers that all of my colleagues are with us today, and I got to jump off. So I will be back and there to answer some questions, but thank you everybody for all the work that you're doing. I'm pleased to work with my colleague in the House and with my great colleagues in the Senate, my great colleagues in the House and my great colleagues in the Senate. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Once again, for members of the Maine press, if you have a question that you'd like to submit into the queue, please send Zach Holman a chat during this Zoom, and we'll call on you in the order in which you ping us, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself. Representative Golden, your thoughts on today?
Well, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues and everyone that's been involved for an incredible effort. For 4 years now, I feel like this delegation and the governor's office, the Maine Lobster Association, the Maine Lobster 207 have all been doing what we could individually and as a team to push back against these very misguided regulations and trying to raise awareness about it in the Congress and in the country to push back against this. I agree with Senator Collins. I've never seen anything like this in regards to just how unjustified these regulations have been, successively getting worse over the last 4 years. And it reached a real crisis point here. This was, I think, one of the best legislative actions I've had the pleasure of being involved in over the last 4 years. The last couple of weeks, the governor's office and DMR brought this to the delegation. Our two senators, Senator Collins and Senator King, were very key in getting this language in this conversation going in the Senate, getting it into the Senate version of the bill with this omnibus is starting. And you've seen some of the response and rhetoric coming out of some of these groups that have been pushing these lawsuits, forcing some opposition in the House, where Shelley and I were able to work with our two senators to fend off some of that criticism. This was a great team effort, and I just want to thank my colleagues and the governor's office and MLA and MLU. Patrice and Jenny from MLA and MLU, very active too, making phone calls to other members of Congress outside the delegation. We were all working the phones together, and it's just a very rewarding result here with a nice pause. That I think that it's a long pause, but the effort is not done here. And I think we're all going to keep working together over the next several years to try and address this issue in the long run. But we do represent the ideological spectrum of the Maine political body, in my opinion. And the fact that we've been so unified on this says a lot. We all did it because it was the right thing to do for the lobstermen, for their families, for the communities that they live in and that they hold up. So they're so vital to the economy as well as the economy of the state. So we did the right thing for the state of Maine, and that's really what it's all about. And I just want to thank everyone for that. And of course, knocking on wood, we'll get this thing passed this week and get home to Maine.
All right, thank you very much, Congressman. And last, we have Curt Brown, who is working the waters, and it looks like it's a gorgeous day out there. Curt, what were your thoughts when you heard the news yesterday, and what do you think the impacts will mean? You're mute yourself, sir. Unmute. There we go.
There we go. Well, I just want to start off by thanking the governor, the entire delegation, folks at the Department of Marine Resources, MLA, MLU, everyone who worked so hard on this. This is a great day for Maine lobster, and the future looks much brighter today than it has for a long, long time. So thank you everyone for the hard work. My name is Curt Brown. I've been lobstering since I was 8 years old, and I've been protecting right whales since I was in high school back in the late 1990s. I think one thing everyone on this call can agree on is that it's important to protect right whales. I would argue that there isn't a group in the country that's done more to protect right whales than Maine's lobster men and women. The measures that we have taken over the last 20 years that you've heard everybody speak about have worked. No documented entanglement since 2004. no documented mortalities ever with Maine gear. The modifications that we've made to the gear that you can see right here on my boat have worked, and we're proud of the measures that we have taken, and we're proud of their effectiveness. I look out here on the water today and I see a community that is optimistic about the future today, both of our lobster industry and of right whales. And I will just end by saying that I have a 7-year-old son who loves lobstering and a 5-year-old daughter who loves lobstering. And if they choose to, I hope they can make a future in this industry. My son has 2 posters on his wall in his room. One is of Aaron Judge of the New York Yankees, which I certainly do not support as a Red Sox fan. But the other is a poster of the whales of the Gulf of Maine. And I gave him that. It was on my wall when I was growing up. Now it's on his wall. When it comes to protecting right whales, it's something we take very seriously as an industry. We always have, and we always will, if we are given the opportunity to continue as an industry. So thank you, everyone, once again, for all the hard work, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
That's fantastic. Curt, thank you so much. And first off, who threw in a question, we have Jack from News Center. Jack, what would feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question to everybody.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for hosting this. First of all, my question is regarding this money. It's $50 million every year for the next 10 years. If this is passed, do you have a timeline of how this money will be rolled out? Will research come first, or will everything be able to be accessed all at once through those towns and fishermen being able to access that pool of money? Do you have a timeline that you could tell me about how that money will be rolled out?
Jack, we can't, I don't think we can give you a direct timeline now. And it's the 50 million a year is the authorization. The appropriation will vary somewhat from year to year based upon the needs and the justification. The 50 million is what's authorized. Appropriations are separate from authorization. But I foresee this to be rolled out pretty rapidly. Certainly by the spring or early summer, and as Susan has mentioned, there are grants here for data collection as well as research on gear, and so that's an ongoing project. I have to mention, I was in a scoping or a meeting with the feds in Ellsworth. It's got to be 7 or 8 years ago on this very subject. And I remember saying, you know, what information do you have? What's the data? And they said, well, we're not so sure, and we can't really afford to fly up and those kinds of things. And we you know, and so they know that this is a shortfall, and they've known it for a long time. And hopefully this funding, which will become available to NOAA as soon as this budget bill passes, is that they can put to good use to determine the whereabouts, as I mentioned, of the whales. That should have been the starting point. But fortunately now, I think there's going to be some real focus on that question.
Let me just clarify. This year, if you add the 3 pots of money, it is about $52 million. But there are 3 pots, separate pots of money. Going forward, as Angus said, there is an authorization for up to $50 million a year under a particular program. And 20 million was actually appropriated under that $50 million program this year. The other 2 pots of money we've worked to get into the bill before we put in the additional funding. So as someone who will shortly be the vice chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, I want to make sure that additional appropriations are targeted going to the lobster men and women who can test the gear, going to University of Maine, for example, going to the State Department of Marine Resources, going to the Maine Lobstermen Association and the Maine Lobstering Union, going to those groups. The language, so I prefer the pots of money that we had previously gotten because they were much more targeted. And I think would lead to real life testing and research, and that's what we need. So the future amounts remain to be determined, but we need to make sure that the funding goes to entities that will really help us solve this problem.
Matthew, I've got to go to a
Yes, sir.
meeting that I've had scheduled for some time on an important topic. I can't talk about the topic right now, but I again want to emphasize what an incredible team effort this was to make this happen. And I loved it when Curt said, you know, it's a new day on the water out there, and we're going to work to lift this cloud entirely. But in the meantime, 6 years is a good time to collect the data, to develop whatever alternative gear will work and be economically feasible, and mitigate whatever small risk there appears to be to the right whale. None of us want to see this animal go extinct. None of us would be sitting here if we thought that the Maine lobster industry posed a substantial risk. But all the indications we have are that it does not, and therefore this pause is both responsible and critically important to the thousands of men and women in Maine that have made this one of the iconic industries in the country. So I'm sorry I have to skip out, but I've got another, it's another impending crisis, not involving the lobster industry, but something we've got to work on. So I've got to head upstairs.
Understood. All right. Thank you for your time, Senator.
Yeah.
Representatives Pingree and Golden, Governor Mills, would either of you like to, would you like to speak to Jack's question about the distribution of the funds, or?
I think Senator Collins and Senator King accurately addressed that question. We're delighted that there is funding available for DMR and the fishermen in particular to continue or to engage in deep research about the course of the right whale, its evolution, its track in the waters, to do acoustical and aerial surveillance and all the kinds of research that we need to do in order to effectively balance the economic needs of the lobster industry and preservation of the whale. We don't want the lobster industry to go extinct, and we want to preserve it and make sure that we have a healthy balance in the water.
All right, thank you. We have next up from the BDN, we have David. David, unmute yourself, and what question do you have for us today?
Thanks, Matthew. I wanted to ask Senator Collins, as well as Representatives Pingree and Golden, about how this occurred operationally, you know, those discussions with House and Senate leadership. And I also wanted to ask what the White House's involvement was. Was President Biden or Secretary Raimondo informed about this?
Well, let me take first crack at that, if I may. To answer the second part of your question, yes, Secretary Raimondo was involved. I know the governor had met with the secretary. I've met with the secretary. I suspect all of us have met or talked with the secretary about these onerous regulations. She had told us, and I also, and David, we've already provided this to you, the clips from the various hearings where this has been brought up. She was felt very much that her hands were tied and that she needed legislative language. So that's what we worked on. You should realize that we've been working on this issue for a very long time. When the regulations first were coming out, we were working and trying to get the administration to understand that the right whale was very important to be protected, but that the Maine lobster industry was not the cause of the fatalities, and that there was absolutely no evidence, just theories and hypotheticals to warrant the onerous regulations. So we've been working on this a very, very long time, but in the last couple of months, it became obvious that the Biden administration was going to proceed with terrible regulations, in part pushed by a very unfortunate court decision, and that it truly could spell the demise of the lobster fishery. So this was the only vehicle, the omnibus funding bill, that we could identify as a way to get this pause in the regulations for 6 years. There was lots of debate going back and forth on the language, on the number of years, on the research. It was an extremely difficult process, but because we worked as a team, we were able to get the job done.
All right, thank you. Representatives Pingree or Golden, Governor Mills, would you like to speak to the operational aspect of this? Okay.
I think the senator accurately summarized this longstanding discussion. And as she said, it goes back more than 6 years when the litigation began under a previous administration, having nothing to do with this particular administration. But I found some listening ears, some good ears in this administration and in the U.S. Senate that made themselves accessible to us and available to help in the negotiations.
I'm happy to weigh in. It takes me a while to figure out the mute button in the car. Anyway, so it's already been described as a long, complicated process, and it really is important to understand that this back and forth, this conversation has been going on for a long time. Clearly, this fishery has been modifying their gear and working on all the things they possibly can, and doing so with a certain amount of lack of data and a lack of real understanding about where the right whale are traveling and all the issues that we have. But when it comes into the very intricate details of this particular language, I just want to emphasize that it takes all of us working together, but it's also these bills are very, very complicated. This is a funding bill, but this is authorizing language. And as Senator King mentioned before, those are two very specific things in the antiquated bodies that we work in of the House and the Senate. And so for all of us to work on this, we had to both work with the administration, who, as you've heard, is somewhat, their hands are tied because of the court case. They can't just overnight say, we're going to make a major change, and required a certain amount of language. So we had to work with the committee chairs of the authorizing committees in the House. That's the Natural Resources Committee. You have to work with the subcommittee on appropriations that has oversight of the funding. Because these are the last days of negotiating a piece of legislation, you have to engage the leadership in both the House and the Senate, and the majority and the majority parties. I can't quite explain how many phone calls there are and emails, and how much that all attributes to. And because we're going back and forth saying, well, okay, you've got that language in the Senate, but I'm not sure I've convinced so-and-so in the House, or we've got to, weigh in, or, we've asked the Department of Marine Resources to, help us with the language, and they've been just extraordinarily helpful. But it is a long and complicated and detailed process. And just when you think you have made 2 inches of progress, something gets in your way, and 3 inches, is going backwards. So I know from my side, it requires an extraordinary amount of willingness and cooperation on the part of your colleagues, because each one of them has a reason each one has a reason for not wanting to do this. Let's just face it. And this isn't something that's easily understood. We're all, people who represent Maine, live in Maine, know what the fishing industry is. But from the outside, people are very concerned about endangered species and the right whale. And so to be able to make this argument and have people understand the difficulties of what we're dealing with. I would say one other thing, that we're not talking about some industrial fisheries of big corporate boats or foreign governments or all the things that we often have to deal with in fishing policy. These are owner-operated boats, people who go out every single day, who pass down their licenses, within their family, whose kids want to be fishermen. It's a very different kind of fishery. And, those are the kinds of arguments you get into and explanations you have to make when you're looking at all these different parties in the House, in the Senate, on all the different committees, because, everybody has a say here. So when you're talking about the back and forth, that's why everyone keeps saying this is complicated. And, if somebody has a argument that they make to you at 2:00 in the morning, you got to find them at 2:15 and tell them why you think there's another way to look at it.
Yeah, David, long process. Over the last 4 years, this has been debated on the House floor. The delegation has sent multiple letters to the Trump administration, to the Biden administration. We have repeatedly gotten NOAA to bring their staff up here to meet face-to-face with the Maine lobstermen, to hear directly from them about what doesn't work about their proposals, why it's unjustified given the lack of data. This is a long, ongoing conversation that's been going on for many years. In regards to the last couple of weeks, I would just say the urgency, the nature of the emergency made it very timely. And this delegation, although small, I think is quite strong when unified around an issue that is so Maine-centric, and we're really able to hold together and had a lot of influence here. But the process has been long and appropriate, and just a great result.
Thank you very much, Representative Golden. And I think we all agree that it's Curt Brown. It is all about the lobstermen, and we're trying to help you out. So I'm going to allow Curt Brown to sign us off and give us any closing remarks you might have, or even just a Merry Christmas from Santa Claus that you have on board.
That's right. I don't know if you could see the boat that just passed me as the delegation was speaking, but I think it sums it up nicely. The boat that just passed me is owned and operated by a young kid named Pete Barton. And Pete was an apprentice under me probably 10 years ago. So when Representative Pingree talks about passing down tradition and sustainability and just the overall ethic of the fishery, that's exactly what this is about. And it's really amazing for me to see the next generation of harvesters out here on the water, optimistic about the future of our industry for the first time in a long time. And that's all because of the hard work that our governor, our delegation, and the folks at DMR and MLA and MLU have done. So I just want to thank everyone involved one more time for all the hard work. And absolutely, it's the holiday season, so this hat isn't going to fit very well, but we have Santa Claus right here. So
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for the hard work, and have a wonderful rest of the day. I hope
Thank you,
you're
Curt.
warmer than I am right now.
Thank you, Curt.
Thank you, Curt.
Travel safe fishing.
All right, thanks everybody for participating in this, and thanks to the Maine reporters who asked the good questions. And we'll get you video as soon as possible. And have a wonderful rest of your day, and happy holidays.